Good morning and welcome. My name is John Keene, and I serve as chair of the Department of Africana Studies at Rutgers-Newark, which is sponsoring today's talk. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Ramona Ross, who will be speaking on rethinking psychology, fostering a more inclusive and accessible discipline. To quote the flyer, the need for mental health services is at an all-time high, and the availability of clinicians is at a concerning low. This crisis becomes even more alarming when examining the lack of diversity amongst practitioners. Additionally, in 2021, the American Psychological Association issued a public apology for the role psychology has played in systemic racism against people of color. Through her founding of the Psychology Professionals of Tomorrow Mentorship Initiative, as well as her teaching pedagogy aimed at addressing these oppressive factors embedded in the field of psychology, Dr. Ross's work reflects her commitment to facilitating higher order change to address these systemic barriers. It's very important work. Dr. Ramona Ross is a teaching faculty member and assistant undergraduate director in psychology in the School of Arts and Sciences, Rutgers-Newark, SASN. She works hard to ensure that students in her large enrollment courses have meaningful and engaged learning experiences, and regularly offers courses on community psychology, stereotyping, prejudice and discrimination, the psychopathology of childhood, psychology of adolescence, and abnormal psychology, most of which address the multicultural requirement of the psychology major, as well as focusing on applied clinical psychology. Today, Dr. Ross will discuss what a holistic approach to mentorship can reflect, as well as the strategies she utilizes to make psychology as a discipline more inclusive and accessible to her students. And one additional thing that I'll add before I turn it over to Dr. Ross is that she's an affiliate faculty member in Africana Studies, and her courses in psychology can be counted as electives toward our major or minor. So take Dr. Ross's courses, and we welcome you becoming an Africana Studies major or minor. Now I'll turn the Zoom over to Dr. Ross.
Thank you so much, Professor Keene. I truly appreciate that warm welcome. I do want to start off by saying a huge thank you for this opportunity to be affiliate faculty, for this opportunity to speak to our students today. A big thank you to Christina for helping to facilitate this. I have a short PowerPoint just to kind of help optimize our talk today that I will share with us as we get started. My contact information is there. I'll also be sure to throw it in the chat before we end, just so that you'll have a way to contact me if there are any other questions or things we don't cover today. As Professor Keene mentioned, the talk today will be focusing on how we can rethink and reimagine how we deliver psychology to our undergraduate students. And my goal here is to just point out some strategies that I utilize to foster a more inclusive and accessible discipline. I do have some goals for today. Anybody that knows me is I like structure. So I did want to mention a couple of things that I hope to cover. In addition to some of my classroom strategies, I do want to talk a little bit about my mentorship initiative called Psychology Professionals of Tomorrow. Before jumping into any of this, I want to just pause for a second and say a big thank you to my colleagues in the psychology department, Dean Mattis, Dr. Delgado, Dr. Vander Wal, and Dean Henderson over in the graduate school, and Dr. Angelica Diaz-Martinez over at GAZAP, where without them, a lot of these strategies would not be possible to implement. So I did want to pause there and make sure that I say thank you, thank you. I wanted to offer a little bit about me before we get started. So I have a PsyD in school psychology from Rutgers-GAZAP over in the New Brunswick campus. PsyDs are not often talked about in our field. They are a type of doctorate. Most people have PhDs that we are encountering in higher education. A PsyD is an applied doctorate in psychology, meaning that the bulk of my training is about clinical service delivery, which kind of streamlines our preparation in becoming clinicians. My background is in assessment because of that school psychology lens, learning style, social emotional learning for kids, as well as this interest in trauma-focused work. And I've had training in trauma-focused CBT. Here in our department, I am part of the teaching faculty, which means that my primary role is delivering courses. So I can teach anywhere between 3 to 4 courses each semester. Most of my courses focus on applied psychology, and I teach a lot of the multicultural course requirements in our department, which I'm really excited about. I've named a couple here: community psych, stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination, as well as our cross-cultural psych course. And then I'm also the director and co-founder of the Psychology Professionals of Tomorrow program. Dean Henderson is our co-founder as well, and I'll talk about that at the end. I wanted to start with one of my favorite quotes that really just drives my teaching and drives my why as to why this work is so important to me, from Bell Hooks. The classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academy. I highly recommend Teaching to Transgress if you haven't read it already. Okay, I wanted to start with my teaching philosophy. So accessibility is a huge issue within the field of psychology. As I mentioned in that blurb, there is this systemic racism and systemic oppression that's embedded in the foundation of a lot of the work that we read and understand in the field of psychology and the discipline, something that they have acknowledged in 2021. But that's been guiding my work from the beginning. So things that I implement in my coursework to make the material and the assignments more accessible to students, there's a couple things. So I like to operate from a trauma-focused lens, meaning that I understand that students, our students especially coming from an anchor university, there needs to be appropriate flexibility. There needs to be the implementation of autonomy in our courses. And I really, really emphasize the building of community. I often get asked how I facilitate, these small group conversations or these, small group projects in classrooms of 100 plus. And that is something that I take pride in, and it is a priority every semester that we build some sort of community in these larger lecture style classes. I kind of make it a goal to try to talk to everyone one-on-one at least once or twice for the semester. So that's crucial for me. In addition to making the coursework more accessible, I think it's important to think about the diversity that our student body represents. And so our students are not just our students. They are working full time. They're adjusting to college expectations depending on where they went to for high school. And a large amount of our students have family responsibilities that I think is important to integrate in how we teach and what our course expectations are. Regarding the inclusiveness and representation in how I teach, I think it's important, again, to just pause and acknowledge that APA has this longstanding contribution to systemic racism. They issued a public apology in 2021, and I think that was critical to now seeing a shift in the field of psychology, how we teach psychology, how we understand psychology, and really just preparing the next wave of mental health practitioners. I do want to highlight in their apology, there were a couple specific things that they mentioned that were areas they need to address and have begun addressing that I'll touch on in this brief talk here. They did acknowledge that there are significant barriers to graduate school. In the last part of my talk, I'll look at that a little bit more closely when we talk about mentorship. There is a huge lack of diversity amongst faculty and clinicians. The norms that we use for psychological testing and to decide what psychopathology is based on the DSM-5 have also been rooted in this Western idealism, and it's not inclusive. And then as well as the research that we operate from usually does not include a diverse population in their participants. I will also talk about some strategies that I utilize in my classroom to work towards decolonizing psychology, and again, making the content that we're discussing more accessible to our students, more relatable to our students, and hopefully encourage more clinicians to join our field. So for me, when I am designing a class or I'm putting together lectures, course content, a multicultural lens is a non-negotiable for me. So within our department, there are specific classes that count towards our multicultural requirement, like my community psych class or the SPD class. But even when I'm teaching my more applied courses, like my intro to clinical psych or my psychopathology of childhood or abnormal psych, it is critical that I incorporate multiculturalism explicitly. In my opinion, every topic that we review should have a multicultural lens. Just like every professor, at the end of the semester, I go through my teaching evaluations, which is sometimes a painful thing to do. But some of the feedback that I've received in my non-multicultural requirement classes is how much they appreciate seeing that incorporated when talking about, clinical psychology or talking about psychopathology of childhood. So it's a rift I have when I look at syllabi, and it's like diversity is 1 week of the 1 week in the syllabus, somewhere in the middle, kind of randomly. I think this lens is a non-negotiable, and there's a way to incorporate identity and all of the things that we talk about throughout the semester. Another aspect that I think is critical to include is narrative work and storytelling. I think it really brings to life the plights of a lot of the populations that we're studying in these courses. So, using things like TED Talks or podcasts, I think is critical to bring this work to life. And as a school psychologist, I'm always interested in different ways to deliver information, more than just kind of, lecturing or reading off a slide or reading a research article. I think seeing this narrative work or reading transcripts is very powerful for our students to start to foster empathy and understandings for the populations that we're studying here. I also look closely at the research I'm summarizing each semester, and it's critical for me that I utilize research that has participants that represent the world so that we're citing diverse populations. Much of the research that the field of psychology has been founded on has been, my students laugh, I always use air quotes, has been normed on, does not represent the way that the world looks. So it's critical that I implement research and I talk about research that has been normed on diverse populations and researchers who are diverse in themselves and sharing their work. I make that clear on the syllabus. I also, another strategy that I use with summarizing the work of clinicians, diverse clinicians and diverse researchers, I love to just show their pictures. I like to bring who is doing this research to life. And so that is critical to the work that I do. Another strategy that I use in an effort to decolonize psychology and integrate a more multicultural lens is taking a strengths-based approach when I talk about various underrepresented populations. So within the field of psychology, we talk a lot about risk factors. We talk a lot about populations that have experienced adverse circumstances. And I think that's important to acknowledge, but I also think it's important to take a strengths-based approach in talking about these populations and highlighting the strengths that they also bring to the table. So on the left, you'll see a summary of some of the courses that I teach. If you haven't had class with me before, I encourage you to review this list, and please come join me in the future. In addition to what I teach, I also have that translate to the assessment opportunities for my course. So I am definitely not a quiz and exam professor, and that's it. I think it's important to offer several assessment opportunities for students to really buy in and really foster their interest in the subject area. So on the right side of this slide, you'll see a couple assessment opportunities that I offer my students to really find what they're passionate about and share that with us in the class. In an effort to foster community, there's a lot of small group discussions, there's presentations, and I think it's really helpful for us to learn from each other. So that content evaluation that we're looking at on the right side of your screen refers to a media evaluation where students self-select a piece of media that they want to critically analyze for stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination. We're going through those right now in my SVD course, and they're very, very interesting to see that, the TV shows that, and the media that students are finding these themes embedded in. Another assignment that we do in my community psych course is a Bronfenbrenner analysis. So Bronfenbrenner is using an ecological style analysis to look at systemic issues. And here students really get to pick parts of their identity that they feel are impacted by systemic racism or oppression and flesh out this analysis to see how these intersecting parts of our communities and our, our world as a whole impact them. And I always find it very interesting to see how they highlight that interdependence and the factors that are perpetuating the struggles that they see in their communities. In addition to the Bronfenbrenner analysis, we also do a policy brief in my community psych course, which again, I like to leave my students with action steps. Not everyone is going to go out there and become a psychologist, and I'm aware of that. So I try to make the coursework that I teach accessible to them, regardless of where they decide to pursue after Rutgers. So the policy brief assignment is really fun. They get to put together, I'm biased and I'm saying a fun, some of my students may be rolling their eyes right now. The policy brief assignment is essentially, putting together a document that helps highlight why, again, they get to pick the issue, is an issue, the research highlighting why this is an issue, empirically based interventions on how to address this issue, and then they implement and integrate community psych principles that are really heavily embedded in the importance of collectivism in their briefs. And then within our classes, like day to day, we do a lot of case studies with, again, diverse, diverse clients, I use that in quotes, to really just highlight what this looks like in practice and what their thoughts are about the various systemic issues that could be perpetuating the symptomology and the pathology that we're seeing in the case studies that we're looking at. Okay, so I'll move on now just to talk a little bit about my mentorship work. I did want to highlight this quote just to bring to our attention the severity of the issue regarding the need for psychological services, as well as the diminished capacity for us to provide those services. So in September 2020, the National Council for Behavioral Health calls upon Congress to take action to prevent a second public health epidemic. So this is right in the height of COVID, a reference to the diminished systemic capacity for mental health services accompanied by ballooning demand. So essentially what we're seeing here is this high need for mental health services. And we see this across the board for both children and adults. It's alarmingly high right now for children as well. And then when we look at the amount of clinicians that we have, it's not possible. And this is not something that has, just come about in the last couple of years. If we look at the trajectory of, the number of clinicians that have been produced in the last 5 to 10 years, we've never really been able to meet the demand. But now we're seeing that we're at an all-time high with this diminished capacity to serve the need of the community for mental health services. While this is an issue in itself, when we take a closer look at the representation amongst our psychologists, we see that not only is there not enough psychologists or mental health clinicians to serve the need, there's also this huge discrepancy in the diversity amongst the psychologists that we have practicing. So 4% identify as Black, 4 to 5% identify as Asian, 5% are Latinx, and 0.3% identify as Native American or Indigenous. So this discrepancy and this need for practitioners and this need to serve the community just is continuously compounding on itself at this point. So when I think about my why and how I can kind of intervene to help support my field and help support my community who so desperately needs mental health providers that they feel like they can relate to, that will understand their plight in this world. I think a lot about the lack of diversity in psychology. And so mentorship, I think, is one avenue for me to intervene in my capacity to help support the next wave of mental health practitioners. I do want to highlight a couple quotes here from a Huff article entitled Psychology's Diversity Problem, published in 2021, that really just kind of summarizes what we're seeing and really gives us a call to action as clinicians, as faculty members, regarding what we can do to get involved. In my community psych, using my community psych or my systemic lens, we look at the foundational issues, and if we want to make true second order macro system type changes, we need to get involved as early as possible. So ideally, right, we'd like to see some mentorship happening in high schools. My mentorship strategy happens to take place at the undergraduate level. Usually when people think about mentorship, they're thinking about PhD programs or master's theses and who can get involved and kind of mentor them there. But I think it needs to be much wider and much earlier in terms of how we're intervening. This article summarizes what the author describes as a leaky pipeline. If you've read any psychology article or have talked to a psychologist, we're all about pipelines and gaps, and that's the language that we use. So here we're talking about a leaky pipeline, and I just couldn't reiterate these points enough. So one thing that they're highlighting is the superficial recruitment strategies, something that I notice, every time the fall comes around, I get all these emails about DEI recruitments. We get emails about diversity nights to share with our students. And something that I'm really, really interested in is how are our diverse students being supported once they get into these graduate programs. So for me, that superficial aspect of it is something that I pay close attention to when recommending a program or, talking to my students about what I think might be a good fit. I think we need to be looking at the culture of programs at the graduate level and the undergraduate level for supporting our next wave of clinicians. This article also highlights that there's a lack of adequate mentorship. And again, I'm looking at the undergraduate point of preparation where students may not know how to ask for mentorship. A lot of our students in the psychology major or minor don't realize that they cannot go out and do anything really, psychology applied type work without a graduate degree. And by the time they do, they're so far along in their major that the opportunity to either take specific classes or to get research becomes much more difficult. We also see a lack of funding. So that is a huge systemic barrier, especially for our clinicians of color to getting to that next phase of their training. Unless you're doing a PhD program, which again, is very small in the number of students that they admit every year, you are paying for these training opportunities out of pocket. So for some people, the article summarizes it and estimates it to be around $100,000 of student loan debt that one can acquire in trying to pursue a degree to become a psychologist. So that's a huge systemic barrier that we're seeing in producing our next wave of clinicians, as well as attaining relevant experience. I did want to highlight the importance of mentorship at the undergraduate level. We see that it is associated with boosted academic performance, increased retention rates. 10 to 15 years ago was an issue regarding having students of color get to higher ed. We saw that there was a gap there. But now we're seeing that students are getting to higher ed, our students of color, but the issue here is retention. We're not seeing them complete their undergraduate degrees, which is making it even difficult to see them in our graduate school spaces. Mentorship is also associated with increased pursuit of graduate studies and the replenishment of professions, which we so desperately need in our field of psychology. Okay, so I do want to shift now and talk a little bit about the mentorship program. It's entitled Psychology Professionals of Tomorrow. I did mention Dean Henderson is our co-founder, our biggest cheerleader. A lot of this is just her cheering us on, connecting us with opportunities. I can't thank her enough. And I did want to highlight our grad fellow here too, Zion Cridgelow, for all of his great work since the program's founding. The mentorship program is geared towards students who are underrepresented in our field. And the mentorship is very targeted in that these students have to have an interest in becoming clinicians. So they can want to become a clinician either at the master's level or at the doctorate level. But we're very specific in how we select students because the goal here is to mentor students who want to become therapists and give back to our communities. Over on the left, you'll see that the mentorship program is supported by 2 grants so far in the past. We did receive the IDEA grant from Rutgers-Newark that we were really excited about. And we also have been privileged enough to receive the Bringing Theory to Practice grant in our first year from Elon University. And this grant has just been pivotal in supporting the work that we're trying to support our students on, as well as really just fostering a sense of community nationally with like-minded higher education individuals that I have just found to be invaluable in this quest. Hi. So when I use the term holistic in looking at mentorship models, I think it's crucial to view our mentees as people with lives and people with responsibilities outside of what we see. I think the culture of academia is so pursuant sometimes on burnout and just kind of focusing on what needs to be done within the realm of academia that we don't necessarily focus on the person as a whole. So I try to operate from a lens of empathy, putting myself in the shoes of my mentees, a lot of them with which I have stories that can relate exactly to what they're experiencing, as well as just really fostering this community with the work that we do. Okay, so I just wanted to mention a couple of things that we work on within the psychology professionals of tomorrow, because I think our mentorship style is very different than what I've uncovered in the past. So we do want to foster a community amongst our students. And so we do that via a cohort model. Each year we take in about 10 students to form this very tight-knit cohort model. We call ourselves a family. So we are going into our third year now. So I'll be recruiting for the third cohort in about a month or two. In addition to fostering this community through the cohort model, we're also seeking to address some of the systemic barriers that were outlined in that leaky pipeline description that I gave you a couple minutes ago. On the right is our curriculum, things that we accomplish every year, and we're always looking to build, but these are some of the critical components of the program that I think really target the student holistically that I don't think is really discussed with traditional mentorship styles. We spend a lot of time on financial literacy. So not just looking up like what sorts of scholarships are out there, because these applied psychology programs are really us funding ourselves, looking at not only scholarships, but what programs, for example, support students working as well as attending. There are several graduate programs that is a strong no-no for them. And so for our students, because they need a way to also make money and support themselves while they're in school, in a graduate school, we need to find a program that will allow for that. And there are programs out there. There are programs that hold their classes either in the evening, they have some sort of hybrid of in-person as well as online coursework. So there are programs out there. And so figuring out how a student can support themselves while attending these programs, looking towards their next phase in their professional development, I think is critical. We have like a whole financial literacy seminar. We even talk about budgeting. We talk about some students in their gap year, how they can save so that when they're ready for graduate school, they have a set of money put aside to help fund them while they're there. So I think financial literacy is critical, more than just, this is the type of loans that are available to you. And, these are scholarships, because I think it's much deeper than that. We also spend time looking at research. The rigor of our undergraduate courses and the size of our courses just sometimes makes it very difficult for students to have opportunities to really delve into research articles, understand how to read research articles, and then critically analyze and critically think about what it is that they've just read. So within our mentorship model, I spend a lot of time reviewing with my students how to read a research article, how to ask questions about what it is that they just read, and what does that look like now in application for us as future clinicians. We also have DEI seminars, which I think is critical to preparing our students to, attend graduate programs that may be at PWIs. And even if they're not at PWIs, because our field in general lacks diversity within their cohorts in these graduate programs, they probably will be, there probably be very few students of color. So what that feels like to be that solo status, or what that feels like to combat stereotype threat, we're discussing in these DEI seminars, and I think starts to give students language for what they may experience or what they may have already experienced in their higher education time. Another thing that I make a priority to have is a graduate student panel and a practitioners panel. Both of these panels, we emphasize diversity, so that as our panelists are talking to us about the great work that they're doing, they're also discussing with us the plights that they've had to encounter to get there. Because I think that part of the feedback is critical. How did you make it work? How did you show up in spaces where you were the only? How did you show up in these spaces where you may have been on the face, received microaggressions? And I think that makes our panels a little bit more unique than what we typically see in this model. And then we also do a lot of work around graduate application prep. So lots of works around, CVs, personal statements, mock interviews. So that's probably the part that's not so fun, but we do make sure that they're prepared when they get to that point in their careers. I did want to highlight 2 quotes from my mentees to just kind of add some context to the experience of the program. The one on the left here is highlighting the program has helped cultivate a foundation of knowledge and tools to utilize as I continue on to my next chapter. And I know this program will be of great help to those who may be a bit unsure as to where they should go or need to begin, because you'll be amongst a family of students and mentors who care about your success. So you won't have to worry about traveling this journey alone. That last part of that quote means so much to me. You'll be amongst a family of students and mentors, excuse me. That collectivism, that community building, I think is critical to this work. And that is the foundation of this mentorship program. Again, the quote on the right here, this program has helped me set attainable step-by-step goals through my process of applying to grad programs. Our grad application process is very vigorous. So that is highlighted there. By holding me accountable, along with providing an abundance of resources I wouldn't have found on my own. I wish other students knew about this opportunity and the sense of community and support you will receive throughout your journey. And so again, I want to highlight the sense of community, but I also want to highlight that this is a journey. Some students, most of our students don't go straight into a graduate program right out of their undergraduate careers. And so supporting them on their journeys is critical to making sure that they reach their end goals of becoming clinicians. I did want to offer a couple stats. We're going into our third cohort now. So our pilot cohort was 2021. There were 4 of our students out of that 10-member cohort that were ready for applications that year. All 4 entered into graduate programs, which we were really, really excited to see. So there was a master's in clinical counseling, a master's in MFT, a master's in clinical psych, and then a clinical psych PsyD program. And I want to emphasize here the readiness for applications. So we take in students from various years. So I have like some sophomores, some juniors, some seniors, some people in their gap years. So every year will look a little bit different regarding when people are ready to apply. But we were really excited to see the 4 students that were ready for applications. They were successful in getting into their first choices. We're right in the middle of interviewing right now. So a lot of our mentees are going through that vigorous process. So we're hoping for good news soon. And then I just wanted to wrap up here with my hopes for the future. I would love to develop more courses around identity and strengths-based approaches to psychology. Just like we're doing here, I want to continue to collaborate across disciplines. If you've had courses with me, the field of psychology offers an abundance of resources, but then I also pull from sociology, anthropology, Africana studies. I think just, having that collaboration in how we view the world and how we view people is critical. So I hope to continue to do that. And then just professionally, I am participating in larger task force on how we foster new clinicians at the undergraduate level. And so I want to continue to be a part of that macro system change. And that's it. So I'll stop sharing here.
Wonderful. So I think we do have time for actually a lot of time for questions from people who are attending. You can ask them, and I think we can either do that via the chat or let's see, yes, the comment section Christina mentioned here. Right. Let's see. You can either do the chat or Q&A. So Q&A box. So let's see. So I'll ask if it doesn't look like we have anything yet, but I'll start off by saying, asking a question. Could you say a little bit about your own trajectory into the field and how you got started? I mean, you did talk about this somewhere, but it would be great to hear a little bit more.
That's a great question, Professor King, because I think it really does tie into, when we think about our why, like why is this work so important to us? So I did attend Rutgers, New Brunswick for my undergraduate career, double majoring in psychology and criminal justice. And I had a lot of support in finding out more about graduate school. What I will highlight, when I got to graduate school though, like I felt like the ultimate outsider. And so my cohort teases me up until this day, our first year of courses, I didn't speak to anyone. I felt so out of place. I felt like I don't belong here. I think they made a mistake. There's no way. So I was totally quiet the first year. I felt so out of place. I was the only person that really had to work full time to get myself through the doctoral program. work and go to school full time. So it was just a difficult, it was difficult. And so I didn't feel like that was representative in my program. And I could see that being a huge barrier for people wanting to pursue graduate school and getting there and just feeling like this culture shock. And so I did have a lot of support, not only from GAZAP, but also, from colleagues and other undergraduate mentors that I think really made the difference in me seeing myself through a PsyD program. So for me, that is my why. I know exactly what that feels like. I know how hard it is to get through that when you're sitting in a room and people are talking about, my aunt is a psychologist or my father's a psychologist. And so like you see this generational wealth, you see these generational connections. And when you're the first, it's difficult and it can be very scary. So that is definitely like my why for attending this work.
Excellent. Let's see, we have any questions? Looks like. Can you see this question? Or do you want me to read it out?
Yes, I see the question. Okay, so you're doing a lot of great work, Dr. Ross. How do you sustain and keep up with everything? This has been a question that I've been wrangling with for a while. Within our field, we all talk about burnout and the importance of not getting burnt out and making sure that we're doing self-care. But I don't think as a field and as a context, we always live by what we're preaching. So for me, I think being very aware of burnout and being very aware of when I'm overextending myself. I say all of this as a new mom that is just like, I feel like this has been the wildest year of my life. So making sure that we make time for really critical self-care to replenish, I think, is really important, and practicing what we preach. The other thing I'll mention here, because it's kind of been on our radar recently, is being a stakeholder. So when you are a stakeholder and a change agent in a system, what that looks like for you. And oftentimes there are these invisible burdens that we find ourselves carrying. So being aware of that and being able to set realistic boundaries to self-preservation, I think is critical.
That's great.
Great question.
The audience, please ask questions.
I do have a question that came up from the private chat.
Okay.
You talked a little bit about diversity nights and special events during recruitment time, but how would a student who's looking into graduate programs be able to identify, or what are some of the types of questions to ask to know what programs are really about diversity or they're performing diversity?
Yeah, that's a great question, Christina, because again, like that has been on my radar. Like my students are so important to me. When I refer them to a program, or I say like, this is a program that I think will really prepare you, I want to feel confident that when they get there, they feel that support. So I think it's important, especially when they start interviewing, that they really ask questions about culture and community at those programs. I look for programs that have student organizations that represent the diversity of their students. I want to see information about mentorship styles, what that looks like. I want to see, from, again, first order change, having these professionals that lead the programs, what are their relationships like with their students and the ones that they're mentoring? And, if things do come up, so students have grievances or concerns about the culture and community at the program, how are they handled? I also encourage my students to talk with the students that are there currently, see how they're feeling regarding, being in that placement. How do they feel regarding support? And see what kind of vibe they get from those conversations, because I think that is critical for them to feel comfortable. I'm also very big on feedback and sort of the style of learning. So that is something that I encourage my students to ask about as well. What are feedback styles? How do you deliver criticism? What sorts of relationships do they have with their students amongst those areas? I think are critical for making sure that they feel comfortable and they're in a place that they feel fostered. I also encourage my students to go a little bit deeper than these, because this is another kind of like hot button topic, that everyone has like a diversity statement and it's just plastered everywhere. But what does that look like in practice? And is another area that I encourage my students to explore, that I ask when I become in contact with these programs, potential programs. A great question.
Excellent question. Looks like there's another wonderful question in the Q&A. Oh, and two.
Yes. Okay. So there's another one here. How important do you think it is to expose students to different pathways early on their undergraduate career? I think it's critical. I always tell my students, like, don't get caught up in the doctor thing, because students often think in order to complete or want to become a therapist that they need to do this PhD and they need to do this PsyD, and that is the only route. And oftentimes it can be really difficult to get there because of all these systemic barriers that we're talking about. So I encourage them to explore other pathways. So looking at master's programs, and I always say hindsight is 2020. Like, if I could do it all over again, looking at master's programs that will allow them to practice. So for example, an LPC, a licensed professional counselor, where they can begin to work full-time and then going back and finishing up their doctorate, or working somewhere that will pay for them to finish up their doctorate. Like, really trying to think how we can make this accessible and get them to their endpoint, because oftentimes I think it's presented to them as this like linear trajectory. And if you don't do X, Y, and Z, you're not going to get there, which can be very disheartening. So I do think it's critical to introduce these various pathways as early as possible. Again, if you're a student and you're in your junior or your senior year, you're learning about graduate school, you need research experience, it's hard to get that at that point. So the earlier, the better. Again, looking at both master's routes and doc routes, I think are critical. There's even certifications that can get students started in like alcohol counseling, et cetera, et cetera. But I would say the earlier, the better. Okay, I think there's a couple. I think we're warming up now, Professor Dean. Okay, so the question here says, oh, you've had class with me, awesome. I can relate to feeling out of place part that you shared, and wonder what you expect or what you recommend for preparing for grad school. There's a couple of things that I would recommend. I think mentorship is critical. I know I've kind of like said that so much today, but finding a mentor that you identify with, that you feel comfortable sharing your concerns with, or sharing things that you think will be barriers to you, I think is critical. And I also think educating ourselves and having the language, that's one thing that I hear from my students all the time. Like, they didn't have the language to explain what they were feeling. So like, being the only one, that solo status, what comes with that, experiencing stereotype threat in the classroom setting, being on the receiving end of perceptual bias, like really educating yourself on what you could potentially experience in graduate school, I think is critical. But I think just surrounding yourself with people that look like you, that identify the way that you do, that are in the field, is really encouraging and can help build up that resilience and support. Okay, this is a great question. Why clinical psych versus licensed clinical social worker? Is there a major difference? So this really aligns with the question we answered before this last one, different pathways. I think it really just depends on the student's interest. So I'm not well-versed in social work, but from my understanding, the LCSW, again, is that master's route where you're getting your training as a traditional social worker, but you're also receiving training in how to be a clinician. I've worked in sites where there's psychologists and there's LCSWs, and the LCSWs are just as amazing. So I think it just really depends on what your interests are. If you have an interest for social work, which, typically they're looking at resources, connection, they're in the community more, that may be a more appropriate route of training for you. If we're talking about clinical psychology, again, at that larger and maybe even doctoral level, we're doing more assessments. We may see more severe presenting symptomology or, pathology. So it really just kind of depends on where your interest lies, but I'm happy to talk more with you in the future. Okay, and the other question here we have, are there ways we as students can help foster that inclusive community? Yes, I'm looking at our time. I don't want to go off on a tangent. My students always laugh at me. They can tell when I'm warming up. my students, I want students to know in general that y'all have the power. So when you're in a classroom or you're looking at coursework and it's not representative of what you'd like to learn or the communities that you'd like to see these topics apply to, I think it's important that you have these conversations with your instructors. I think it's important that you look at syllabi and request that you have specific populations addressed. And I think you amongst yourselves have the power to foster inclusive communities. Can you still hear me? Does it sound still okay? Okay. We talk about bottom-up change as a community, banding together and realizing that you have that collective efficacy to have your voices heard is critical. So making sure that there are spaces for you to congregate, spaces for you to share your concerns, making sure that you have mentors and allies that can support you on things that you will think will make the community more inclusive. Everybody plays a different role in this ecological system. So for us to know what will best serve you, I think making sure that you find your voice and finding each other is really critical. It's an excellent question. Yeah.
So we should have time for one more question, but in the interim, can I ask, what are you teaching in the fall for a sneak peek? And that way any students that are in the space might be able to know what great classes would also count for a major or minor in Africana Studies.
Okay, yes, for sure. I know I usually teach 3. So 2 that are up right now are my community psych class. Community psych really takes that systems perspective and looking at a lot of the issues that we see in the world. We talk about the criminal justice system. We talk about K through 12 education. We talk about the school to prison pipeline. We talk about higher ed. We talk about indigenous communities, like community psych. We talk about the LGBTQIA+ community. Like we really foster an understanding in community psych of all these systemic principles that perpetuate the issues that the individuals from these various communities face. So I will be teaching community psych. That's my baby. I love teaching community psych. And just as much, I also am going to be teaching again stereotype, prejudice, and discrimination, our SBD course, which may be just a nice segue. I have a couple students now that are Africana Studies majors and minors. And I think the coursework is really relevant. And I love when they share what they're learning across the disciplines and across the departments, because it does highlight a lot of important issues for us to discuss. And the third one, I'm not sure yet. It might be psychopathology of childhood, where we're going back and forth on that last one. Which again, I think the intersection, and for me, talking about the importance of having that multicultural lens, for example, like when we're talking about, childhood diseases or childhood psychopathology, for example, like we talk about ADHD. We know for little Black boys, when we talk about any sort of hyperactivity, it's automatically ADHD. But a lot of times these are symptoms of trauma that are presenting like ADHD. So having that lens, I think, is critical in explaining these psychological phenomena to our students.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. That was a great reminder.
Thank you.
Lots of.
Well, if there are not any other questions for right now, I just wanted to perhaps close by saying, is there anything that's upcoming that you want to plug?
Oh, yes.
The podcast part for either of you that our students must know about. I know that I want to plug the Sawyer seminar that's happening next week on March 7th and 8th. I'm going to put a couple of things in the chat, but if there's anything that Dr. Ross you want to promote, please do. This is being recorded and will go live on our YouTube channel very soon. So that'll go to the mass audience as well.
No, I love that. So I guess the only thing that I would plug is our mentorship program. So we will be recruiting again after spring break, probably at the end of March. So please be on the lookout for an email from me looking for applicants. So if you're interested or you'd like to learn more about the program before applying, please reach out to me. And I'm happy to elaborate more. That's something that I'm excited about. And then if there are any clinicians that come across this that are interested in getting involved with our mentorship work, sitting on one of our panels or hosting a discussion with our students, we're always happy to have you. So please reach out. Thank you, Christina.
So I think we're at time. So thank you so much, Dr. Ross. Thank you so much, Christina. Thank you so much to everyone who came out to hear this. I mean, it was an amazing
Thank you so much. I
presentation
appreciate the
and
opportunity.
Q&A. Yes, yeah.
Thank
So
you.
have a
Thank you
wonderful
so
rest
much.
of your Friday and have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.